Hello, and welcome to another note from the probability field. We're going to talk about voting. It's something we do in a lot of situations, probably a lot more often than we think. Usually it's in small groups, mostly informal, the resulting decisions not of high consequence or long duration. Like being out with friends and deciding, do you want wings or nachos for the table? Or you're planning a family gathering and are we going to camp at the beach or are we going to camp in the mountains? But at other times, our vote carries a lot more weight with longer time frames and much higher consequences in the balance, as in a jury deciding a verdict, or in the context we usually think of it, election voting. Every couple of years, we find ourselves in the political season where we're deciding on our state and national representatives and on referendums and budgets and maybe even who will be president. In these situations, voting can be and is a very big deal, and one of the most important things that we can do to have a major and enduring impact on our lives and on the lives of others. So when it comes to voting, what kind of a voter are you? Do you lean towards voting for something, or do you tend to vote against something? Or do you not vote? And if you don't vote, and I'm sure you have your reasons why, I would ask you to reconsider. Voting is an important part of what helps make this country what it is. And now I know the United States has its problems, but I think, and I believe most people would agree, that we have a lot of room and freedom here to do what we want and to become who we want. Granted, the field of dreams is not perfectly level for everyone, so there's still a lot of work to be done. But the majority of Americans and people around the world see that in this country, opportunity is omnipresent. It's kind of why so many people want to emigrate here. Now, we need to acknowledge that holding and maintaining the physical and mental space that was fought for and created by our founders for these freedoms and opportunities and dreams to exist is a responsibility. And if we want this democratic republic to continue and thrive, to evolve, to improve for everyone, we need to get over ourselves a little bit and accept that responsibility and start working and sharing together to make it happen. Voting is one of the major elements of that work. A free and fair electoral process is one of the fundamental ways that the voice and will of the people, and that's your voice, is expressed and conveyed to our chosen representatives. And that's the rub. These days, there's quite a motley crew of people out there who want to be our state and national representatives. Unfortunately, some of them do not seem to have the people's best interests or the republic's well-being and development top of mind. They seem to be more interested in power, control, and money. So let's take a look at these three things. We'll start with money, as it's pretty straightforward. These days, the average cost of getting elected to Congress is between $9 and $10 million. So it's no wonder money can be an issue. A few other facts. Representatives and senators are paid $173,000 per year. The leadership gets $223,000. They all get between $1.5 and $3.2 million each to staff their offices. The average yearly lobbyist contributions to each senator is just under $100,000 a year. And some senators this last year received over $500,000. For the House, the average contribution is $35,900 for each of them. But that's not all of it. Lobbyists handed out about $2 billion in the first half of 2022 and just short of $4 billion in 2021, which was not even an election year. And FYI, over 40% of the legislators in Congress are millionaires. And as we know, money talks with a very loud voice. By comparison, only about 5 to 8% of the total U.S. population are millionaires. As for the power and control part, it can be difficult at times to sort fact from fiction in all the campaign electioneering rhetoric. But there are some candidates who obviously have little respect for the intelligence or constitutional rights of the average American. But first, let's address the dead elephant carcass that many Republicans are still dragging around. The 2020 election was not stolen. There was no widespread voter fraud. Yet, in spite of more than 60 court cases that did not present any viable evidence, none, and even with many of the presiding judges calling the actions frivolous and without merit, and Secretary of States from across the country reporting it as the most secure election in history, there are still conservative candidates out there claiming the election was fraudulent, not valid. Get over it. That elephant is dead, so bury it. It's starting to smell pretty bad. Maybe the hard-right Republicans could try sticking to the facts for a change and stop lying to people like they're a bunch of morons whom they can say anything they want to and people will just accept it, no questions asked. Not anymore. For instance, saying President Biden is responsible for inflation. Not. You need to look to the corporate oligarchs for that cause. They saw the supply chain issues as a golden opportunity to raise prices well beyond what was needed to compensate for transient disruptions. This has created a giant windfall for these companies, besides hiking inflation. But instead of that money going into the economy through worker wage increases or solving real supply chain problems, it's going into reported record corporate earnings and into the pockets of already wealthy stockholders. That's a true waste of money. But Biden's actually bringing some billions of that money back to the people by getting the Inflation Reduction Act passed that created a 15% minimum corporate tax structure, where in some cases, little to no tax was being paid. And in a show of how much they care about the average American worker, all 50 Republicans in the Senate voted against the Inflation Reduction Act. And another fine example of conservative Republicans showing whose side they're really on, red states are suing the Education Department to stop President Biden's student debt forgiveness plan from taking effect. 90% of those people make less than $75,000 a year, and this act, by eliminating their debt, will allow them to take care of themselves and their families. By the way, none of that remaining 10% of those millions of people make more than $125,000. So why are Republicans doing that? Well, they say it's unfair because it will harm the profits of banks and financial institutions that service the loans and their investors. And as Senate Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell put it, not all Americans choose to go to college, so it's unfair to eliminate the debt of those who did. No mention of the billions of dollars in the Infrastructure Investment Act that will create millions of jobs in the trades and for union workers over the next 10 years, good high-paying jobs, and many of those jobs will not require a college degree. No mention of that being unfair to those who did not learn a trade. But no surprise, really, as only 13 Republicans of the 219 in the House and only 19 of the 50 in the Senate voted for the Infrastructure Act. The majority of Republicans, as they have all along, continued to try blocking these investments that the country has needed for for decades, for years. It seems that Republicans have a mindset of voting against things, not for them. And then they blame others for not getting the people's business done. Meanwhile, they're using misinformation, lies, fear, and threats of violence to bully voters into handing them the keys to the kingdom so they can take care of business their way. which is to increase their power and control by manipulating voting districts and election processes, limiting your voting rights and your constitutionally guaranteed rights. Oh, except for gun rights, because they support the fear and violence factor that they use continuously while increasing their bank accounts. The NRA is very generous. Let's stay with the economy for a minute. It's an area that polls tell us is of high concern for voters in this cycle. The U.S. federal poverty level for a family of four is $27,550, but that only considers a very basic shelter and a very basic food budget. MIT has developed a living wage calculator that gives a much more accurate, realistic picture of what the minimal cost of living really is. It varies from state to state, but the lowest cost for a family of four was $54,933. That was in Mississippi, basically double the federal level. And in every other state, it is $60,000 or higher. Drawing on U.S. Census and other government data, 46% of American families make $50,000 or less per year. The Fed really needs to adopt the MIT calculator and get a clear view of what people are really up against. So even though the hard right wants to blame the president for a bad economy, Joe Biden, in spite of heavy resistance from the Republicans, is actually doing a lot to improve the situation for everyday Americans. Besides everything we mentioned above, in the first year in office for Biden and the Democratic majority, the number of households reporting difficulty paying expenses decreased by 7%. His support of business and manufacturing, like the $50 billion CHIPS and Science Act, has helped job creation reach an all-time high and has helped keep unemployment at an all-time low. He has also brought down the cost of prescription drugs by allowing Medicare to negotiate prices. And Democrats are pushing back on the right-wing assault on your civil rights. So why do people keep voting against their own best interest? The hard right is very adept at playing the fear card and very willing to back it up using lies and fuzzy facts, if any facts at all. And fear is a big motivator for people. They also advocate violence if they don't get their way, to the point of people getting maimed and killed. I mean, look at January 6th. And they do it without any sense of responsibility or respect for our country or its citizens. Pretty cold. Let's look at a couple of their favorite scare tactics. Oh my God, crime is rampant, and the Democrats are firing all the cops, defunding the police. So not correct. Violent crime is falling and has been steadily since 1991, when it hit a peak of 758 violent incidents per 100,000 in the population. It's now at a current low of 398 per 100,000 and still falling. Property crime has also fallen from a peak of 5,353 incidents per 100,000 to a low of 1,958 and still dropping. I would say a reduction of 47.5% and 63.5% respectively is a significant reduction in crime. Also, there's been a steady rise in the number of public safety officers in the U.S. to over 1.5 million currently, and there are over 900,000 police officers on roll at last count. But there is an area that has seen an increase, and we have to give our Republican colleagues credit for that. That's a rise in the number of firearm deaths, from a low of 28,633 in the year 2000 to 45,832 in 2021, and it's on track to be higher this year in 2022. Another hot-button issue that seems to be stressing people out this election season are those pesky immigrants. But before we get into all the misinformation and fear messages around people crossing the border, there are a couple of things that need acknowledgement. I feel a little like a broken record continually pointing out the obvious, but look in the mirror, people. Immigrants are us. Most of us in this country are of immigrant lineage. Probably all of us, really, because even native peoples, though it was a long, long time ago, came here from somewhere else. And for all of you believers of religious faiths, from the Quran, Al-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 36, do good to parents, kinfolk, orphans, those in need, neighbors who are near, neighbors who are strangers, the companion by your side, the wayfarer you meet, and what your right hands possess. From the Old Testament, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 33 and 34. When a stranger resides in your land, you shall not do them wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the home born among you, and you shall love him or her as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. From the New Testament, Jesus speaking to the disciples, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. When did we see you a stranger and welcome you? Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me. In Paul's letters, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female. My takeaway, you don't need a reason to help people. So I have to ask, are your religions truly a set of divinely inspired principles based in God's love to guide you in life? Or just some old text you conveniently drag out and twist to prop up a self-righteous ego so you can feel superior to others? So let's get back to the so-called border crisis. The idea is being pushed by the extreme right that immigrants are flooding the country and becoming the majority of the population. This is part of the Great Replacement Theory fear factor, that all well-paid American workers will be replaced by cheap immigrant labor, and that they're going to flood our social welfare system and deplete all of its resources. Again, not true. As anyone who has had to rely on our social welfare system knows, it's not all that great. And it's not an easy task for a U.S. citizen to access government assistance, let alone an undocumented immigrant. That aside, do people leave behind everything in their lives and walk hundreds, even 1,000 miles or more on a whim? I don't think so. These people are not coming here for a handout. They're escaping violence and poverty, and they're coming to work so they can support and protect their families. And for the most part, they're taking jobs that a lot of American workers will not or do not want to do. What would you do if you were in their situation? As for the vast numbers, the U.S. population is about 335 million people. Current statistics put the number of immigrants at about 45 million. So that's around 13.5% of the population. Not exactly overwhelming. I don't think you need to worry about being replaced anytime soon. Then there's all the fearful hand-waving about every other person fleeing poverty and gang threats and splashing across the Rio Grande looking for safe haven is actually a drug mule. And they're spreading all kinds of addictive powders and hundreds and thousands of pills on the streets of America. Not even close to reality. The illegal drug trade is big, really big business, and the cartels are basically large corporate enterprises. So having a bunch of random scruffy immigrants with a high probability of capture by border agents carry a few pounds of powder or a few hundred pills at a time across the border, hardly cost-effective or practical. DEA seizures are usually reported in tons, not pounds. and they move through legal ports of entry by tractor trailer, mixed in with standard commercial product shipping, or they come by drone or by airplane. The DEA also indicates a large portion of the illegal fentanyl and precursor chemicals for cooking various other drugs comes in from other countries, primarily China, via mailed parcels. Drug mules are a myth. The U.S. drug problem is more severe and with way more deaths than in any other country in the world. So I think we need to consider the likelihood that the so-called cartels are at the very least in collusion with, if not actually managed by, agents of foreign governments not friendly to the U.S. and its allies. Or it could be the corporate oligarchs whose only allegiance is money and profit. Okay, there's a lot more fear-mongering and other issues that we could delve into, but let's just get back to voting. As a citizen of the United States of America who enjoys the freedoms and opportunities gained by that status, you have also incurred an obligation. That obligation is to be an active participant in maintaining the integrity of this democratic republic and the rights guaranteed by our Constitution. Our participation is what will assure access to those freedoms and opportunities for each of us and for the generations to come and for those who wish to join us. There are multiple ways you can fulfill that obligation, but the foundational cornerstone of participation in governing is by voting. So I ask, do you vote out of fear and against your own best interest? Or do you vote out of hope and to make a better world? I know it's no simple task to sort through the torrent of information to know if what a candidate is saying or what is said about them is true or not. But it's not too difficult. It's not impossible to find neutral and trustworthy sources to verify information and access valid data. But straight facts and brain intellect are not your only resource. You can also draw on the intelligence of the heart for guidance. It takes both the heart and the mind to make a durable decision, and not just at the ballot box. You cannot even live life with just one or the other, just a brain or just a heart. It's a very visceral reminder that everything and everyone is connected. When you vote, your vote is not just for yourself. One more thing. Not voting is essentially voting against everyone's best interest, not just your own. If you are neutral, silent in the face of oppression, you are aiding the oppressor. So go out and vote, participate, and make your voice heard. Encourage your friends, encourage your family, encourage perfect strangers to vote. Thank you for listening.